Rohit Das. Hello everyone. My name is Rohit Das. I will be presenting this paper on live migration of containers in the edge. The motivation for this paper is the usage of resource-constrained edge devices in a cluster. Such devices can be cheap and power efficient, but can be assumed to be prone to failure. While live migration and migration as a whole has been used in data centers for system maintenance, location-based migration of user applications, etc., it has not been used previously to manage clusters in case of failure. Here we are proposing live migration as a failure mitigation method for such devices. The reason for using containers instead of VMs for migration is because containers use less resources than VMs and are suitable for our purpose. We will also be using delta differences between consecutive checkpoints to copy checkpoint dumps between nodes before migration to reduce bandwidth usage. The topology of the cluster will be such that there will be a master node overlooking all the other worker nodes and their functions. This algorithm will be running on a worker node. The active node will be actively announcing its live status at every fixed interval, which is also when deltas of checkpoint dumps are sent over to the standby node, which is a redundant node in case our current active node fails. When an active node fails, a timeout occurs in the standby node, as shown here, which then informs the master and takes over as the new active node and picks up from the last checkpoint it received. Otherwise, it keeps track of all the deltas it receives. Timeout as a failure detection mechanism is a really simple process and is the crux behind the success and uniqueness of the algorithm. As the active node proactively announces its live status, standby nodes stay almost dormant until needed, and hence can reduce power consumption and probability of cluster failure. By live status, it simply means the delta differences the standby node receives, and the timestamps of these deltas are used to calculate the timeout. Here is how the master node handles information on all the nodes. A hash list is maintained with node info such as live status, associated standby nodes, and so on. If a standby node informs that a specific node has timed out, the master node will mark that node as dead and assign the reporting standby node as the new active node. It will also check to see if any free nodes are available and assign one of them as the new replacement standby node. All the scripts for running servers, calculating timeouts, etc. are available with the master node, which can copy the relevant files to the appropriate node and get it up and running. This is how the master node handles cases where resource usage in any node crosses any disk usage or memory usage threshold, which can be set by the user. In such cases, the master node will look into the pool of free nodes and assign it as a new active node to share the load. This is also how the master node chooses the active and standby nodes during initial setup and copies over the appropriate files and scripts. The algorithms shown before have been implemented using Mininet, which is a software-defined network or SDN. We can use it to run a collection of end hosts, switches, routers, and links on a single Linux kernel. It uses virtualized nodes to simulate a network, create custom topologies with one command, and enables running real commands on the nodes to emulate our use case. Here is a visual description of how the cluster topology can be. Ideally, for our system model, one or more masters will be present, forming a cluster of super peers to mitigate failure of master nodes. Using Bully election, one master node will be overseeing the entire cluster with the other nodes receiving checkpoints. As shown here, the cluster of active nodes will be running some sort of distributed workload. Each active node will be associated with one or more standby nodes, as defined by the redundancy factor defined by the user. The number of standby nodes are lesser than the active nodes to show that there need not be a 1:1 replication ratio for each node. Mininet has a Python API which has been used to emulate this cluster. Each of the node operations and algorithms mentioned previously are simulated using Python threads. Each standby node has a server running which receives live status info from the associated active nodes. It also calculates the timeout as described before. All the scripts will be made open source. Now here we present results of an alternate approach, where instead of active nodes announcing their live status, the standby nodes ping the active nodes. The problem is, in case a node goes down, ping takes around 7 seconds to report a timeout, which significantly increases the downtime. In this graph, we can see how the downtime is reduced with active nodes being proactive in announcing their live status. Since Mininet is not thread safe, for higher time intervals above 4 seconds between delta differences, the timeout and failure detection go out of sync and hence increase the downtime. Here is how delta live migration can reduce bandwidth consumption with respect to other migration processes. In future, we will be working on actual implementation of the above mentioned algorithms by using standard benchmarks like YCSB and extend it to using heterogeneous edge devices in the cluster. Here is a diagram of the planned implementation. That concludes my presentation. I would like to thank all the organizers and sponsors of the conference for being able to arrange all of it in the middle of a global pandemic. Thank you all and stay safe.